Yo, welcome everyone to another Mere Mortals book recap. My name is Kyrin. I do these book recaps for those who want to know more about what the Mere Mortals have been reading this past month. So I go over all the books that we were reading between Juan and myself and give some additional highlights, extra little comments and thoughts that I had on them. And no point in sticking around and wasting time. Let's jump into it. My favorite book of the month was Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. I had heard about this book previously through The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and I have always had a sort of mentality of wanting to separate the world into games. Like, which game is it that you're playing? So if you're playing the game of, woke culture and trying to one-upmanship someone on the internet, that's a shitty game to be playing. Like, that's a stupid game to play. And that's always how I'd sort of viewed those things in my mind. So, am I playing the game of rising the corporate ladder to get more money so that I can have more possessions, so that I can impress someone to blah, 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 blah? Or can I play another game, which is, earn a little bit money, enough to survive, and then sort of get out of that whole world, that whole game, and then go play my own one, which involves handstands and learning languages and podcasting. Like, that's way cooler. So I've always sort of had a fascination with viewing the world in terms of games like that. And I think this book was also nice for the philosophy aspect of it, in that it was a way of structuring the world and viewing the world through a completely different lens. And I really enjoyed it compared to what you would term classical philosophy as like niche or Socrates or things like that. Probably because it was in modern language, so it was only written, I'll get my notes up here and be able to tell you exactly when it was written. It was written in 1986, so not too long ago. The way it was structured, everything about the book just made me go like, damn, this is a really fun, nice read. So I ended up giving it an 8 out of 10. I'm going to jump back to this at the endish of this video, of this audio, because I do want to read out a bunch of quotes from it, but it's probably going to take a while. So I'll jump onto some of the other books first, and then we'll come back to this and I'll read out some of my favorite quotes. The next one was Snow Crash, which I gave a 7.5 out of 10 to. So very relevant in today's world with the metaverse, the concept of the metaverse, of being able to dive down into a completely different world, and you are in this sort of VR type of space where you can interact differently, where you can behave differently as well. What I was surprised about the book was I was expecting this would be an additional sort of like wow factor to it. Whereas to me, it sort of seemed like people were escaping from their current shitty world to go into the metaverse. And like, God, I hope that doesn't happen with ours. I really hope the normal world is nice, and then it's just like even cooler to go down into this new one. The other aspect I think was maybe just the additional ability for expression is what holds its value. It's not being able to flip a NFT or whatever game in the new metaverse on this blockchain or anything like that. It's you can behave differently when you are in the metaverse, and maybe this will actually be a really cool thing if someone can design one that is even halfway similar to what is written in the book, with the VR, the ability to interact with people sort of face to face. And that was one of the things that came out in the book, was one of the designers who really made the metaverse what it is in the book. She was focused on the facial aspect, on getting the minutia of the tiny little eye dilation, pupil dilation, smile creases in the face to indicate expression and whatnot. What really made the metaverse so amazing was that she was able to do this, and then this allowed this communication to actually be something. Whereas, so many other aspects, such as like if you cut someone with a sword, blood and guts don't spill out. It's sort of like they've been frozen, and it's like a chopped, and you can see inside into their blood and guts, but it's not spilling out everywhere and whatnot. So maybe that's where the true value lies, in that if you go into the metaverse, yes, you can be anonymous somewhat, but then still have that anonymity connected with the normal human signals that we get when speaking to someone face to face. The, disappointment in their eyes when you say this thing, the shock when you say that thing, the disgust if you do this or whatnot. Like, all of those are really vital and valuable cues, and which are somewhat being missed in the current social media landscape of text, and then even audio is somewhat lacking. So yeah, I enjoyed the book. Really enjoyed the other aspects related to language, which surprised me as well. I didn't think he'd be going so deep into the relativistic versus universalistic type languages. Is grammar coherent through all of them? The idea of a sub language that can sort of infiltrate into the brain and take over people is quite intriguing. I'm just a bit of a linguistic fan, so there was quite a lot of unexpected aspects to the book, which I quite enjoyed. So that's why I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. It was a pretty good book. The Myth of Sisyphus was another one. This one was a bit meh for me. I gave it a 5 out of 10. I like the idea of absurdism and the Sisyphean tragedy or comedy, if you want to call it that, because people view Sisyphus in different ways. Some people, I suppose like the most common one is like, geez, what a torture. You have to do the same thing repetitively, day in, day out for the rest of your life, never achieving your goal. You get the boulder just up to the peak of the hill and then bam, it rolls down. I had actually, this book sort of reverses that and says Sisyphus might be the most happiest of us all, because he gets the continual pleasure of living in the absurd, and it's that moment when he's walking down the mountain. What are his thoughts? And Albert Camus there was sort of indicating like he would be in rapture. It'd be like a joyous thing for him. This isn't a new concept to me. I'd actually heard it from a blog post a long time ago by this guy called Rushvi, who wrote about how Sisyphus might be the happiest of us all, because when you can continually chase something, you don't get that elation, yes, of achieving your goal, but then disappointment of being like, oh, I need a new goal to chase after, otherwise I'm going to be unfulfilled and happy. Whereas if you continually have one which you can never reach, you can almost reach, but never reach, maybe that is what makes you super happy. So the book was good for that part, and I just do like the myth, the creation of Sisyphus. I find it a very compelling story. But then all the poetry, the sort of absurd nonsense contained within was, I think I somewhat get the point of writing things poetically like that. You can get something a little bit deeper perhaps than just normal structured, trying to convey as clearly and precisely as you can language. I get that, but that's not the best for me, I would say. So I can somewhat really enjoy it sometimes when it's like the Tao Te Ching, for example, and there's a tiny little book and it's just these little witty paragraphs and sentences. The master who does nothing leaves nothing undone. I like that quote. But when it's a full book, it's sort of, I get a bit tired of it. So that was, 5 out of 10 for me. Nothing too special. Juan also had a book called Love Stories by Trent Dalton, who was a Brisbane writer. It was intriguing actually going into the book review that Juan did and seeing, I know where he's sitting. I know that place. I've walked by it all the time. It's probably like at least once a month I walk by that very same location. Would I have ever seen that guy there? It's a possibility. So yeah, it was kind of funny. Like if things had been different, my love story might have been included in the book. And that is actually not true, because the love stories, the very word love for me, Juan mentioned this, I dislike that word. It seems to have gone beyond the point of utility, and it is now a word which can mean anything to anyone, which is unhelpful. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the word love. And so even just the book itself, the title itself would have probably put me off. Love stories, like meh, whatever. So anyway, he seemed to enjoy the book. So if you're into love stories, hey, that could be the book for you. Coming back to Finite and Infinite Games, I've got a bunch of things here which I wanted to read out and just highlight. So I'll do that now. So if you don't particularly want to do this, you can skip to the next section where I'll read out some Boostagrams. But for the moment, here we go on page 37. I found this a bit of a contradiction. So he was talking about the fluidity of our social and therefore personal existence as a function of our essential freedom, the kind of freedom indicated in the formula, who must play cannot play. Of course, we have seen finite games cannot have fluid boundaries, for if they do, it will be impossible to agree on winners, but finite games float as if they were in the unconstrained choice each player makes in entertaining and continuing the play. Now, the thing with this was, he says, who must play cannot play. That is the rule, I guess. This was on page 37 for those interested. And that made sense to me. Totally agree with that. If you're being forced to play a game, you're not really playing a game. That's something a little bit else. But then there was other sections of the book where he was saying a person born into slavery and being forced to work the cotton fields or something like that, they're playing a game. The game is you pick the cotton or you die, and you have a choice in that game. You can pick the cotton or you can choose not to pick the cotton and you can die. And he was trying to explain how even death or the threat of death isn't a compelling thing. It's not forcing someone to play who must play cannot play. Whereas I didn't understand that at all. I was just going like, what the shit? Like, if the threat of death or violence is not a compulsion and is not something forcing someone, i.e. enforcing them to play who must play, I'm not really sure what is. So that didn't make sense to me. And if someone can explain that to me, that would be perfect. 39, page 39 and 40. So he's talking about politics here. So let me find the correct part to start from. So I think he was saying, like, therefore, even warfare and heroism can, with their self-contradictions and false play, no nation can go to the war. Here we go. It was on page 40. Therefore, for infinite players, politics is a form of theatricality. It is the performance of roles before an audience according to a script whose last scene is not known in advance, whose last scene is known in advance by the performers. The United States did not, for example, lose its war in Southeast Asia, i.e. with Vietnam, so much as lose its audience for a war. No doubt much of the disillusion and bitterness of its warriors coming home comes from the missing final scene. The hero's homecoming to parades or ceremonial burial, an anticipated scene that carries many into battle. I thought that was a really fantastic point. Yes, what disillusioned that war, what made that war so horrifying and bad for the soldiers coming home, was they weren't greeted as, congrats on your patriotism for fighting for your country, what you believe was right. They were shunned, they were ridiculed. This is generalization. It was before my time as well, so this is me interpreting how I have seen history presented. And that seemed to make a lot of sense to me. That they were playing a game, the game of war. They chose to, or many people chose to. A lot of people didn't, and that's where I would say they're not playing the game of war. But those who did choose to go and fight voluntarily in Vietnam, it's almost like they got the rules changed on them. Yes, they were either going to die and become a martyr of some sort, or they would come home victorious, or losing as well. That's a possibility. But they didn't lose in the classical sense. They didn't lose the battle, come home, and get condolences from their own citizens for you tried your best sort of thing. It was, no, you're the real enemy here. You are the bad guys. I thought that was a really great point. And the theatricality, the outcome should be known beforehand. That's why the master player the person who is the best player in the world, the best game, they know exactly what's going to happen. They can anticipate perfectly, and they just smash the other person. That is the person who is the master player. That theatricality. When we watch, we somewhat expect an outcome to be this way. You expect this thing to happen. I thought that was some really good points there. Another one. So this is from page 50. And it says, where are we? The more powerful we consider persons to be, the less we expect them to do, for the power can come only from that which they have done. After athletic contests in which major titles have been at stake, it is common for the audience to lift the winners to their shoulders, marching them about as if they were helpless, in the sharpest possible contrast to the physical skill and energy they have just displayed. That's an interesting point there. Monarchs and divinities are often borne on ceremonial transports. The very wealthy are driven in carriages or limousines. How funny is that? I'd never thought of that before. Yes, the person who is the winner, who is particularly in athletic contests, the most powerful, the most capable, are then hoisted as if they were helpless and paraded around as if they had no ability whatsoever of themselves. How strange is that? That's just such a strange concept. I love it. I love that idea. I'd never thought of that before, and that really jumped out at me. Here's another one from page 52. And of course I can't find it. Right at the top. It is apparent to infinite players that wealth is not so much possessed as it is performed. So in this section here, he was talking about how wealth is something that you need to display, and that power that you can gain from it. The game is not to actually own the things yourself. If you've seen a mansion which has 50 rooms in it, you can't sleep in all of those rooms every night. No, you can only sleep in one of them. And so over the course of a year, maybe you can sleep in all of them, but the enjoyment you would get from that would be tiring, because you'd be like, oh, this new room again, I prefer this room. So he was sort of saying, like, when you have wealth, it's not the possession of it, it's the performance. So it's sort of the showcasing of the wealth. Wow, look at all these mansions, look at all these rooms I have. Why don't you come in here, TV crew, and show me in this room, and then show me in this room? And he made some good points also in that section about how, yes, the wealth, and you can see this everywhere with the cars, the rings, the jewelry. It's not the actual possession of it that matters, because you can have all that stuff and have it hidden in a vault somewhere, and it loses its power. You could have all the gold in the world, but if no one knows that you're the one who owns it, and if you can't prove it by performing in this wealth, by showcasing it, the theatricality of it, what's the point of it? There's no point. So I thought that was an interesting point to think of. If you're chasing wealth, you need to maybe recognize that whatever it is that you're chasing, you do need to perform it. It does need to be a performance to showcase to other people. And it's actually given me a little bit of acceptance, a little bit of, I'm not going to say gratitude, but an understanding of why people will display things ostentatiously, and maybe an appreciation for, okay, that's an easy trap to get caught in. They're performing their wealth, and that's something that sort of goes against my general principles. I'm not a big believer in that, but it has made me appreciate, I think, that just how important it is. If you have wealth, you need to perform it. So that was a little interesting point there. Page 76 now. So this was on illness and death. And he was talking about doctors here. And he was saying, physicians who cure must abstract persons into functions. They treat the illness, not the person. And persons willfully present themselves as functions. Indeed, what sustains the enormous size and cost of the curing professions is the widespread desire to see oneself as a function or a collection of functions. To be ill is to be dysfunctional. To be dysfunctional is to be unable to compete in one's preferred contests. It is a kind of death, an inability to acquire titles. The ill become invisible. Illness always has a smell of death about it. Either it may lead to death, or it leads to the death of a person as a competitor. The dread of illness is the dread of losing. Never really thought of that way as well. I think this is why I really like this book. It just had different unique ways of looking at things, such as illness or wealth or time, and presenting it in a way where I was like, yeah, okay, that sort of makes sense. Yeah, wealth is performed, or illness is a death of you being unable to compete in the game that you want. So that is why illnesses associated with death and losing, almost like you're a loser if you're sick, because you now can't compete in your, i.e. athletic game or the work game or the game of creating the most friendships or getting the most beautiful wife, or insert whatever game it is that is playing a finite game. You lose all of them. Whereas if you're playing in the infinite game, then being sick is just part of the game itself. You're not losing anything. There is nothing to be lost there. I like that aspect. I found that interesting. There was another one related to time. I think I might skip over that one just for brevity's sake, and I'll go to page 106, which is talking about knowledge and how this is closely related to property. So he's talking about these things and then saying, knowledge, therefore, is like property. It must be published, declared, or in some other way so displayed that others cannot but take account of it. It must stand in their way. It must be emblematic, pointing backward at its possessor's competitive skill. So close are knowledge and property that they are often thought to be continuous. Those who are entitled to knowledge feel they should be granted property as well, and those who are entitled to property believe a certain knowledge goes with it. Scholars demand higher salaries for their publishable successes. Industrialists sit on university boards. Damn. That is really, really cool. That is, once again, I would not have guessed that the accumulation, the acquiring of knowledge would have been a finite game, something that you're playing to win a title or whatnot. Somewhat, especially a university degree, I can see why that is a finite game. But that aspect of it's somewhat like property in that you feel like it is deserved, that it needs to be published, it needs to be performed, knowledge needs to be performed. You can't have absolute wisdom and not perform it if you're playing a finite game, because no one's going to know about it. There's no titles to be won. So therefore, yes, you do need to publish all the time. Therefore, yes, you do want to be sitting on the university board, or you want to be paid extremely wealthy, in a high salary, because, hey, look at this knowledge I'm accumulating. Look at this competitive skill that I'm displaying. Bang on. Another one, page 109. So, finite speakers come to speech with their voices already trained and rehearsed. They must know what they are doing with the language before they speak it. Infinite speakers must wait to see what is done with their language by the listeners before they can know what they have said. Infinite speech does not expect the hearer to see what is already known to the speaker, but to share a vision the speaker could not have had without the response of the listener. Speaker and listener understand each other not because they have the same knowledge about something, and not because they have established a likeness of mind, but because they know how to go on with each other. And I think that explains the appeal of podcasting, for example. You can have infinite speech within that, because I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to be saying now. I don't have tons of notes. Like, this is my notes here in front of me. It's probably 20 words max on the general structure, the theme of how I wanted to present these, and just a reminder for myself. I probably could have done it without it. And that is what speech is. It is putting things out into the world, and you're not 100% sure what's going to come out of your mouth. And it can even surprise you what comes out of your own mouth and what you say. And you need to judge what is being said with another person. Speech is somewhat pointless without someone else there to give you feedback on. And then you can have that dance of them saying something, you saying something back. And this creates opportunities for sorrow, for laughter, for joy, for happiness, for anger, disgust, like all of these cool things. And so that is why you might want to try and why I want to, perhaps search more opportunities for infinite speech, where I can discuss things with someone and have those joyous moments of like, whoa, what the fuck? Why did you just say that? In comparison to speech where you know what's going to be said, they know what's going to be said, and yet you have to go through it anyway because the board dictates that we have this conversation because my employer says you need to be aware of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last one, there's still a couple more. There were so many I really took from this. This is crazy. But I'll stick to this last one here, which was something that I found randomly intriguing, which was about machinery. And so he was talking about the goal of technology. And he was saying machinery is contradictory in another way. Just as we use machinery against ourselves, we also use machinery against itself. A machine is not a way of doing something. It stands in the way of doing something. When we use machines to achieve whatever it is we desire, we cannot have what we desire until we have finished with the machine, until we can rid ourselves of the mechanical means of reaching our intended outcome. So think of a harvester or something like that. You have to use that to get the fruits and the vegetables, but you don't want the machine to be part of the final outcome. You just want the fruits and vegetables for yourself, and then you can eat it or sell it on, or etc., etc. The goal of technology is therefore to eliminate itself, to become silent, invisible, carefree. We do not purchase an automobile, for example, merely to own some machinery. Indeed, is not machinery we are buying at all, but what we have by way of it, a means of rapidly carrying us from one location to another, an object of envy for others, protection from the weather. And then he draws parallels between this and the radio and movie screens and TVs and things like that. So yeah, I also enjoyed that aspect. Now, one thing you might be saying is like, Kyrin, these quotes are boring. I don't like them. You're making them uninteresting. And I could somewhat agree with that, because what really jumped out at me was these individual quotes that were contained with the whole paragraph, the section. And this book isn't big. It's 150 pages in length, and many of those pages are blank and just have random stuff on them. So I would highly recommend people to read this book if you're interested in games. Now, I think I mentioned this in the book review. This is a book which will suit certain people to a T, i.e. me. But if you are not interested in how games are set up, how maybe you can view life in terms of being as a game or something like that, you're probably not going to enjoy it, because it does have a lot of poetic language, and it's not super clear and definitive on certain things. But what I most enjoyed about this book was the way it made me see some things I'd thought about tons of times before. You know, what is wealth or property or language or things like that, and then turn it on its head and put it in this different context of, oh, it could be, it's like something that needs to be performed. It's a theatrical thing. That I found that super, super cool. So that's why I really liked Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse and those quotes there. All right, let's go on to the Boostagram Lounge. So this is, for those who don't know, a value for value podcast. This podcast can only continue with your help and your support. Now, whether that be feedback, motivation for me to keep going on, to interact with what it is that you're sending me and getting those signals back from the speech that I'm putting out. You know, it's somewhat infinite speech on my part, because I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I need the interaction back as well. So one thing I do recommend is to send me a Boostagram. So I always include some prompts at the end of the book review that I do. What did you think of this? Did you notice this from the book? And I really enjoy when you can send something back and give me some feedback on that. So best way to do that, newpodcastapps.com. And I would also recommend the Fountain app. And so here we go. We actually have all of our boosts this week from Fountain. So there you go. The first one from Oscar Merry, he sent 1,100 sats and says, this one does sound like a slog. Thanks for the summary. And that was on Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. It was a slog. I can't recommend it to people. Maybe an abbreviated version, or like probably it's better just going to YouTube and looking up like a summary of someone else's interpretation of his words. You'll get the bulk of it, but without the needless drudgery that I had to endure. Peter, the lesson I took away from this book was this: even though life is inherently meaningless, it's worth living it anyways, because the alternative, i.e. death, is worse. So that is The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, 2,200 sats. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's... I would also say I took that away. I really wish he'd spent a bit more time arguing about why death and suicide, in particular suicide, because that was his starting point. There is only one question really worth contemplating. Should I commit suicide or should I continue staying alive? And I wish he'd done a better job really diving into that question. I feel like he somewhat answered it, but then moved on to other aspects of absurdism, the paradox and things like that. Yes, I would also... I want to agree wholehearted, like 100%. It's always better. But I think there would be some also edge cases where taking your own life would be a like moral or ethical thing to do, or maybe even just the best thing in terms of, if you're in continuous pain and torture and stuff like that. But in terms of, the vast bulk of people and the vast bulk of their lives, yes, death does seem to be something you should play against, and the game is to continue on as best as you can, maybe not as long as you can, but best as you can against the final outcome, which is going to come to all of us anyway. So yeah. Here's another one from Peter R. Awesome review. You might make me reread after all these years and see how it holds up. So that was Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. Another 2200 stats. Thank you, Peter. Yes. Yeah. Hell yeah, man. Go for it. I wish everyone could have the chance to just like read it. And then because I'm just fascinated to see how would everyone's opinion of the metaverse change if they read the book and were like, oh, the metaverse, you can't do all of these sorts of things in it. Like the only senses you have in there are sight and sound. So you're restricted quite severely in that. You're still, from what I'm gathering, using a joystick or a handheld device because there was no real indication of how you move around in the metaverse. Although I do know Hero had like a functionality part where he could be in the metaverse whilst riding his motorbike in the real world, and it had like limited functionality. So there's sort of a crossover, a blending there. But yeah, I would love to know, Peter, what you thought about it, if how it does hold up, because yeah, that book was published 40 years ago, something. I've got my notes here. I can tell you exactly. Published in 1992, so 29 years ago, or 30 years ago. Yes. So I would love to know. I would love to know what your thoughts on that would have changed, or what if you remember things differently, because depending on when you read it, that could be quite interesting. Another one from Oscar, Pre-Listen Boost. This is one of my favorite books, so looking forward to this one. Snow Crash, so that was 1100. Thank you, Oscar, much appreciated. Mary Oscar, I also wanted it to be longer, 2200 stats, also on the Snow Crash book. So yeah, hell yeah, that was one thing I wish as well, and I mentioned it. It would have been funner to have an extra, like, I'd say like 100 to 200 pages, exploring some more concepts or providing a bit more detail on how the world got into its sort of distributed, fragmented, dangerous state that it was in. I would have loved to have known all of those things. And then the final one here from Peter the Slav on the Finite and Infinite Games was 2200 sats. I'm having some trouble seeing the utility in thinking about my life interactions as a game. The only thing I can think of is it might allow me to take life a little less seriously and therefore reduce stress and anxiety levels if it's just a game. Yeah, I would sort of put it this way. I take my life pretty seriously. For the most part, I am serious. In the book, he was basically saying finite games are serious, infinite games are more joking and joviality. So I sort of see it as maybe like three levels. There's the very top level. Life is serious. You want to take it seriously. You don't want to make bad decisions and do stupid things. The middle section is more, maybe like longer term stuff. How do you want to behave? Do you want to play a game where there's a winner and a loser, and if you don't win, you're going to, be depressed and anxious and whatnot because you can't win, i.e. Having the hottest wife out of all of your friends. Let's just pick that one. That's probably a kind of shitty game to play. And then even if you do win, you still suffer the winner's dilemma of like, oh, I won the game, what do I do next? Sort of going back to the myth of Sisyphus. There's something about the eternal struggle, pursuit, which is kind of satisfying in a way. So I would say, like, the more I can live in that realm where the top level, serious, like life Kyrin as a whole is useful, and that's something I want to not take too jovially, I guess. It's not like haha Joker level style life is a joke, you are the joke sort of thing. But just beneath that is sort of like, you know what, life is kind of cool and funny, and I don't need to play that silly game related to having the hottest wife. I can play the game of, I'll find the best partner for myself, and she will adopt and change as we grow together as well. So I can't ever have just one partner. Maybe I have like a myriad of partners all the time, sort of thing. So yeah, and then to the bottom level, which is, sometimes I wouldn't say I particularly love competition in general. I'm not a super competitive person, but sometimes it is nice to win something. So if you're playing cards with your friends, yeah, fuck yeah, you want to beat those assholes and win the game, or if it's a silly little thing, or watching your kid's soccer match, or trying to achieve the best score on this video game, or beat this person at work, or blah blah blah, all of those things as well. I think it's the main point I took from the book was it's useful to think about finite and infinite games when you're taking maybe life too seriously all the time, and you're playing a finite game over like a really long time scale in terms of, I want to be the CEO of this company for this reason, and you haven't properly thought the reason through. You haven't thought through. I'm always sort of asking, like, if you weren't getting paid for your job, would you still do it? Would you still do it if you had to pay for your job? And taking away the considerations of life as well, most people would say no. Like, I do it, I don't particularly enjoy it, but I need to do it. And I understand that's life. There's always going to be a need for janitors and for jobs that I think most 99.9999% of humanity don't want to do, yet 1% or 10% of humanity have to do. I get it. But that's not the route I've taken in my life. I want to be the one where it's like, I would do my job. I would do the thing that I earn money on, even if I wasn't earning money, or even if I had to pay for it. Which I have been with podcasting. I've been paying for plenty of time. So that's my general thing. So Peter and Oscar, thank you very much for sending through those boosts. I really do appreciate it. It does help. One, with motivation for me, and then those sats helps me to boost them around to the rest of the Satoshi economy. So they're being put to good use elsewhere in the world. And that is it for the Boostagram Lounge. What is coming up for March of 2022 is my birthday. That's one thing that's coming up. Yeah. But I can tell you, I have just finished Dubliners by James Joyce and recorded that. So that'll be the first one coming out. I'm also at the moment reading One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit. That's more of a philosophical book. And I didn't finish this one. I read enough of it that I'll do a book review on it, but I didn't fully finish it, was La Casa Verde by Mario Vargas Llosa, which is a pretty famous Peruvian writer. And that one was written in Spanish, so translates as The Greenhouse. And yeah, those are the books that I'm currently reading, and hopefully will have presented for you by the end of March. And thank you for everyone who has listened in, obviously for Oscar and Peter for sending a boost. And I highly recommend everyone else to send a boostagram. If you are listening, watching, go to newpodcastapps.com, and honestly, use Fountain. That's the one I would recommend to go to at the moment, because that is my go-to one. That's the one I use to spread the love and listen to podcasts everywhere else. So that is it for today. Thank you for joining my mere model lights. I really do hope you have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Kyrin out.